Chapter 9. For the first time for the first time in 3 nights, Okonkwo slept. He woke up once in the middle of the night, and his mind went back to the past 3 days without making him feel uneasy. He began to wonder why he had felt uneasy at all. It was like a man wondering in broad daylight why a dream had appeared so terrible to him at night. He stretched himself and scratched his thigh where a mosquito had bitten him as he slept. Another one was wailing near his right ear. He slapped the ear and hoped he had killed it. Why do they always go for one's ears? When he was a child, his mother had told him a story about it, but it was as silly as all the women's stories. Mosquito, she had said, had asked Ear to marry him, whereupon Ear fell on the floor in uncontrollable laughter. How much longer do you think you will live? She asked. You are already a skeleton. Mosquito went away humiliated, and anytime he passed her way, he told Ear that he was still alive. Conko turned on his side and went back to sleep. He was roused in the morning by someone banging on his door. Who is that? He growled. He knew it must be Akwefi. Of his 3 wives, Akwefi was the only one who would have the audacity to bang on his door. Azinma is dying, came her voice, and all the tragedy and sorrow of her life were packed in those words. Okonkwo sprang from his bed, pushed back the bolt on his door, and ran into Akwefi's hut. Azinma lay shivering on a mat beside a huge fire that her mother had kept burning all night. It is Iba, said Okonkwo, as he took his machete and went into the bush to collect the leaves and grasses and barks of trees that went into making the medicine for Iba. Akwefi knelt beside the sick child, occasionally feeling with her palm the wet, burning forehead. Azinma was an only child and the center of her mother's world. Very often it was Azinma who decided what food her mother should prepare. Akwefi even gave her such delicacies as eggs, which children were rarely allowed to eat because such food tempted them to steal. One day Azinma was eating an egg. Okonkwo had come in unexpectedly from his hut. He was greatly shocked and swore to beat Akwefi if she dared to give the child eggs again, but it was impossible to refuse Azinma anything. After her father's rebuke, she developed an even keener appetite for eggs, and she enjoyed them above all the secrecy in which she now ate them. Her mother always took her into their bedroom and shut the door. Azinma did not call her mother Ne like all children. She called her by her name, Akwefi, as her father and other grown-up people did. The relationship between them was not only that of mother and child. There was something in it like the companionship of equals, which was strengthened by such little conspiracies as eating eggs in the bedroom. Akwefi had suffered a great deal in her life. She had borne 10 children, and 9 of them had died in infancy, usually before the age of 3. As she buried one child after another, her sorrow gave way to despair and then to grim resignation. The birth of her children, which should be a woman's crowning glory, became for Akwefi mere physical agony devoid of promise. The naming ceremony after 7 market weeks became an empty ritual. Her deepening despair found expression in the names she gave her children. One of them was a pathetic cry, Onwumbiko, death, I implore you. But death took no notice. Onwumbiko died in his 15th month. The next child was a girl, Ozoamena. May it not happen again. She died in her 11th month, and 2 others after her. Akwefi then became defiant and called her next child Onwuma, death may please himself, and he did. After the death of Akwefi's second child, Okonkwo had gone to a medicine man who was also a diviner of the Afa oracle to inquire what was amiss. This man told him that the child was an Ogbanje, one of those wicked children who, when they died, entered their mother's wombs to be born again. When your wife becomes pregnant again, he said, let her not sleep in her hut. Let her go and stay with her people. In that way, she will elude her wicked tormentor and break its evil cycle of birth and death. Akwefi did as she was asked. As soon as she became pregnant, she went to live with her old mother in another village. It was there that her 3rd child was born and circumcised on the 8th day. She did not return to Okonkwo's compound until 3 days before the naming ceremony. The child was called Onwumbiko. Onwumbiko was not given a proper burial when he died. Okonkwo had called in another medicine man who was famous in the clan for his great knowledge about Ogbanje children. His name was Okagbue Uyanwa. Okagbue was a very striking figure, tall with a full beard and a bald head. He was light in complexion, and his eyes were fiery and red. He always gnashed his teeth as he listened to those who came to consult him. He asked Okonkwo a few questions about the dead child. All the neighbors and relations who had come to mourn gathered round them. On what market day was it born? He asked. Oye, replied Okonkwo. And it died this morning? Okonkwo said yes. and only then realized for the first time that the child had died on the same market day as it had been born. The neighbors and relations also saw the coincidence and said among themselves that it was very significant. "Where do you sleep with your wife, in your obi or in her own hut?" asked the medicine man. "In her hut. In the future, call her into your obi." The medicine man then ordered that there should be no mourning for the dead child. He brought out a sharp razor from the goatskin bag slung from his left shoulder and began to mutilate the child. Then he took it away to bury in the evil forest, holding it by the ankle and dragging it on the ground behind him. After such treatment, it would think twice before coming again, unless it was one of the stubborn ones who returned, carrying the stamp of their mutilation, a missing finger, or perhaps a dark line where the medicine man's razor had cut them. By the time Onwumbiko died, Ekwefi had become a very bitter woman. Her husband's first wife had already had 3 sons, all strong and healthy. When she had borne her 3rd son in succession, Okonkwo had slaughtered a goat for her, as was the custom. Ekwefi had nothing but good wishes for her, but she had grown so bitter about her own chi that she could not rejoice with others over their good fortune. And so, on the day that Nwaya's mother celebrated the birth of her 3 sons with feasting and music, Ekwefi was the only person in the happy company who went about with a cloud on her brow. Her husband's wife took this for malevolence, as husbands' wives were wont to do. How could she know that Ekwefi's bitterness did not flow outwards to others, but inwards into her own soul? That she did not blame others for their good fortune, but her own evil chi who denied her any? At last, Azimma was born, and although ailing, she seemed determined to live. At first, Ekwefi accepted her, as she had accepted others, with listless resignation. But when she lived on to her 4th, 5th, and 6th years, love returned to her mother, and with love, anxiety. She determined to nurse her child to health, and she put all her being into it. She was rewarded by occasional spells of health, during which Izinma bubbled with energy like fresh palm wine. At such times, she seemed beyond danger, but all of a sudden she would go down again. Everybody knew she was Ogbanje. These sudden bouts of sickness and health were typical of her kind, but she had lived so long that perhaps she had decided to stay. Some of them did become tired of their evil rounds of birth and death, or took pity on their mothers and stayed. Ekwefi believed deep inside her that Izinma had come to stay. She believed because it was that faith alone that gave her own life any kind of meaning. And this faith had been strengthened when a year or so ago, a medicine man had dug up Izinma's Iyi Uwa. Everybody knew that she would live because her bond with the world of Obanje had been broken. Ekwefi was reassured, but such was her anxiety for her daughter that